Let's start to make our chocolate sponge cake. This is a classic chocolate Joconde, a Joconde sponge. We are going to beat together egg yolks, whole eggs, sugar, and almond powder in a mixer until fluffy. We also need to whip together egg whites and sugar until fluffy. So, we will have 2 separately whipped egg mixtures. If your recipe calls for beating the mixture separately, I always advise to start by beating the egg yolks, because once the egg yolks have been beaten with air, they can be set aside and don't split, whereas the egg whites mixture will become very unstable and runny like water. So, I always start by beating the egg yolks. We need to add the ingredients to a mixer bowl. Add almond powder made from raw almonds. I always use powder made from raw nuts for all my sponges, as when it comes to baking cakes, the nut powder will also get baked. So if your nut powder is already roasted, then the sponge will most likely dry out too much. The nuts will start to overbake. Then add the egg yolks, whole eggs, and sugar. It is important to point out that I always use chilled eggs from the fridge for all my sponges. I never let them warm up beforehand. This is because I use a professional mixer that always whips the mixture into a beautiful, lush volume. It makes no sense to warm up the eggs so that the sugar dissolves better, or anything like that. I just use eggs from the fridge. And make sure to weigh them. Set them to beat at medium speed. This usually takes about 5 minutes, and we want to achieve a lush yellow mass. Our yolk mixture is ready. It is very fluffy and dense. Now we need to transfer it to another bowl, and in the same bowl, we are going to beat the egg whites and sugar. We will whip it with the whisk. So pour it into the mixer bowl. First, we want to whip it into a white foam, so there are no liquid egg whites on the bottom. And then I will add the sugar. Beat the egg whites at medium speed. This is how our egg whites should look now. They are very lightly whipped. And add the sugar. And here are our egg whites, shiny and fluid. But as there is less sugar than egg whites, it is unstable and will quickly begin to split. So combine the ingredients together straight away. How do I combine the ingredients? First, add half of the whipped egg whites in order to lighten the mass. Then we can add the dry ingredients, which we do, through a sieve so that they mix together evenly and with lots of air. Then add the remaining egg whites. The more mass that you have that needs to be whipped, the more stages you will need. If you only have a little bit, then the egg whites can be divided into 2 parts. Add the egg whites. Try to mix carefully so that the mass doesn't settle. Do not mix the mass too thoroughly after each stage. Just give it a light mix. If every time when you add a new ingredient, you mix it until it is completely smooth, the mass may become overmixed and lose its volume. Add the cocoa powder. flour, baking powder, and mix. Right now, the texture is not very homogeneous and the batter has lots of lumps. Add the remaining egg whites, mix it together, and then add the butter. At the very end, add the melted butter. It doesn't need to be hot, it just needs to be melted and liquid. Add it and then stir constantly so that it doesn't sink to the bottom. And now we need to mix everything until smooth. Our sponge mixture is ready. It is homogeneous, shiny, luscious, and very fragrant. Now we need to pour it into a frame. I'm using a frame 24 by 24 centimeters. And I would like to point out that in fact, you may not need this much sponge for your pastry, but it is hard to whip a mixture for a small frame. So very often in lots of recipes, you will be asked to prepare a large amount. If you have baked the sponge and still have some remaining, you can always wrap it up in cling film, put it in the freezer, and use it at a later date. Or, of course, you can eat it. Spread the batter within the frame, and now I am going to bake it at a temperature of 160 degrees Celsius for about 12 to 15 minutes, until ready. We have baked the sponge. I will show you how to check if it's ready. If you press it, it should spring back. So it's ready. My fingers haven't left any marks or dents. I also want to add that the darker your cocoa powder is, the darker and richer the color and taste of your sponge will be. We have used a dark alkalized cocoa powder and our sponge looks very beautiful, dark, rich, and chocolatey. We need to cool it down to room temperature and cut it out of the frame. The sponge has cooled down. Take it off the mat and cut it out of the frame.